Oh, the host has spotlighted my video for everyone. I say that's an announcement I've never received before, and I don't know what it means. I hope you can still see it, despite that it's in the spotlight. But I'm not sure. I prepared this presentation in English as the whole session, the whole sort of day, sort of uses English as its working language. So even though it might be that all of us, although I see a few names that are open to interpretation, so. But even if we would all be Dutch, and it sounds incredibly sort of arrogant almost, but I would prefer to do it in English because I'm thinking in English about this stuff nowadays. So, but I think we have a mixed group here anyways. So what I sort of want to sort of tell you a little bit about is how at Atlab in Maastricht, we have been working with the concept of student engagement. So the presentation is a bit of a combination of saying a little bit more about an approach, sort of from one colleague to the other, but also introducing the concept a bit further, given that we're all one way or other sort of educators and work with it, maybe directly or indirectly with students as well. So it serves two purposes, really familiarizing you with the concept and sort of saying a little bit about how we have been sort of operating with it or trying to operationalize it rather. So what I have is a sort of a series of slides and a few moments that sort of will also, although it might not be necessary, but for the fun of it, would also involve some interaction through Bookclap. I don't know if you're familiar with that app, but it is very easy to sort of get online with Bookclap. You don't have to install an app. You can either, when you sort of have more than one screen or are sort of cramming everything that's happening onto one screen, but are using your laptop, you can just go to that sort of web page there. You can also scan the QR code with your phone if you prefer to do. I will use it only twice. It's also just to, I think we're all working with all kinds of apps and tools nowadays. It's also a way of showing you yet another one. I have no stock in Bookclap. I just stumbled upon it and thought it was quite helpful. So that's sort of, and as this day is entirely about sharing, I thought let's also share then this experience. So we'll use it once to collect some ideas, sort of, and once to evaluate some things a little bit. So now, as we're with a small group, and we have limited time, but it would be nice maybe if each of you could just, we see names, and in one case I see Groningen, but that's the only indication of sort of where you work. So if you could all take a sort of a quick turn just to say who you are, where you are, and what you do, that would be nice. So at the top of my screen, Esther, you introduced the whole session, but you haven't introduced yourself yet, sort of.
Okay, I'm Esther, I'm from Singapore, and I've been with TU Delft for about 2 years. And I'm at the Center for Education and Learning. I'm a researcher here. And yeah, okay, next person.
Okay, Franca is next on when I look at my screen.
All right, good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me. I've got a lot of problems with my microphone, but let's try it. My name is Franca. I live in Rotterdam. I work at Erasmus University at the strategy office, and I take part in this annual meeting because I am doing the LDA traineeship. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that's why I'm here.
Okay, thank you. Paul.
Yes, hello. I'm Paul Kenis from Belgium, from Odyssey University College. And there I'm the coordinator of a new program in the constructional building materials. So we are educating our students to become the leader on construction site.
Okay, thank you. Nati.
Nati, okay. My name is Nati Mancilla. I come from Spain, but I'm working at the University of Groningen in the strategy department, so at the office of the university, and I'm a project manager, and I'm supporting the Teaching Academy Groningen, who already exists for a couple of years, but we are now in this phase developing it very strongly. So that's why I'm joining this annual meeting, because we have a strong links in the topics and yeah.
Okay, thank you. Wilfred.
My name is Wilfred Rubens. I live in Nijmegen. I was born in Kerkrade, very south of the Netherlands, and I work part-time for the Open University in the Netherlands.
Okay, Michael. Michael.
Hello.
Hi.
My name is Michael. I'm a PhD researcher at the KU Leuven University. I also live in Leuven. And in my research, I came over this behavioral and cognitive and affective engagement in the context of game-based learning. So I'm just interested in that in general.
Okay, thank you. Tanya.
My name is Tanya de Bien. I work at Center for Innovation at Leiden University, and I specialize in online communities and platforms, and how to maintain them and how to engage people on platforms. So
Okay.
why I was interested.
Interesting group. It's also nice to have people from Belgium here, and also from a university college. I joined Atlab 3 years ago, and before that I worked many years at the University College Maastricht. Different focus, I get the impression, but sort of, yeah, same model maybe. And Leiden is nice because that is my original hometown. So, okay, so what I want to do is sort of say a few things about sort of student engagement and indeed how it can be made more sort of concrete by breaking it down into 3 dimensions. And then talk a little bit, particularly, I guess, from the perspective of the current situation that we're all in, but also sort of more broadly thinking in terms of blended learning. But first, have you all been able to log on? I see, yes, you have. Nice. So a picture of the building that I'm not at right now. I'm at home, but this is sort of Atlab. Excellence programs has not shown up excellent, but what Atlab does is sort of, it's a young institute. We started in 2015, or it started in 2015. I joined in 2017. It is a central institute that, technically speaking or administratively, falls under the Office of Academic Affairs of our central administration, but is sort of fairly independent in how it operates. And the idea really is that we are a place that sort of maintains the spirit of talking about and innovating education. Maastricht has I guess, a reputation for having a clear vision on education through its problem-based learning. There was also, though, over the last couple of years, I guess, a growing awareness of the fact that that reputation also really needs to be kept sort of alive and a reality, and that you cannot just depend on, we've been doing this for 40 years as a guarantee that things will continue to be sort of relevant and up to date. I mean, innovation is a dangerous term. It's sort of innovation for the sake of innovation. Innovation, there's not much point, but we're learning every day about how students learn. So that should somehow be reflected sort of in what we do, particularly if we claim to be an institution that values teaching and education a lot. So what we're doing is we're responding to ideas that come from the faculties sometimes who want to explore something related to education. We seek, you might almost say, coalitions with at least some of the other faculties and get projects going. But we also identify areas where we ourselves feel that it's useful to do sort of research, always oriented towards practice, towards implication. So all kinds of projects have grown out of that. Sort of one of the early projects had to do with constructive alignment, really sort of presenting that notion and also placing it in the context of problem-based learning. A very recent, smaller project was about assessment of individual students in groups and the balance between sort of group assessment and individual assessment. A big project that sort of ended in its first stage 2 years ago at VUE was really about how do students and staff at Maastricht University perceive problem-based learning, what are their thoughts about this. The outcome was an overwhelming majority liked the idea of having a sort of a type of education that's sort of very student-oriented and focusing on collaboration, but also many thought that it was time for an overhaul and for a sort of a refreshing sort of approach to it. So new ideas came out of that, and student retention and engagement was actually sort of the focus that brought me to Atlab, a project that was launched in September 2017. Basically, in response to seeing that we have programs, sort of as everyone does, I suppose, but that have really high sort of amounts of dropouts in the first year of the bachelor, and that there were clear differences between programs. Some that lost maybe only 5% of their students, others a multiple of 5, clearly. So what were the reasons behind that? What could be done about it? I'll say a little bit more sort of in a minute about that. So another thing we do is we offer the central complement in a way to what's happening at the faculties in terms of teacher professional development. So many faculties have their own programs, but they don't cover all areas, or there are certain areas where it's felt that it makes much more sense to do this centrally. So that is something that Atlab does as well. And we try to also maintain sort of a community of practice by hosting events, normally speaking also in our building. You can see the building in the picture. It's one of the remaining buildings of a former barracks area, very much in the center of Maastricht. I don't need to sell you on it, but it's really lovely to be there. It's in a park, very close to the city center, very easy access. And we host events that we call teach meets there, or sometimes sort of topical seminars. And more recently, obviously, we've hosted webinars on for instance, problem-based learning in an online situation. And another thing we do, which I think is very important because it provides our sort of direct line with students, is that we organize 2 of the main excellence programs of the university, one for bachelor students and one for master students, where I think our idea of excellence, how we see it really is that the education should be excellent and that it's not about some kind of elitist program for the happy few. And we hope to learn from that and also put things into those programs that we learn through the other things that we're doing. So my focus is on student engagement. It started as a retention project, and I looked at various stages in the life cycle of a first-year student, try to find a way to see commonalities. I mean, some stages are very technical. It's about application and admissions. Others are sort of about student guidance or introduction days or introductions to our educational system. So there's a huge diversity. And in order to create some kind of concept or possibility to compare how all these different things impacted students, I stumbled upon the concept of student engagement and thought, okay, sort of whatever we do, it has an effect on how engaged students feel with this university, whether it's an administrative procedure, whether it is also teaching, although interestingly, that was not in the original project. We're looking at that a lot now, but whether it is binding study advice and how we deal with that, all those things, they affect students and their engagement. So that's what created this focus. Now, before I move on, and as I said, we're only 6, we could have used the chat for this, but we can also use the Atlab. So before I dive into student engagement, I'm curious to hear from you what it is that you're thinking of. Okay, so these are elements or defining factors in student engagement. This is what it looks like when students are engaged. So if you check the device that you've used to log on to Atlab, you will sort of, until now, you will see, when you're looking at it in English, something like, look up, there is no question right now, listen to the speaker or something. But when I click to the next slide, you would see this question, what is student engagement for you? And I'm just curious to see what you think it is about. So if you could enter a few sort of thoughts on what student engagement is about for you. At some point, something should be popping up on, yes, there we go. Yeah, if you have more than one idea, that's absolutely fine. It's interesting to have a bit of a list and see where we have common ground. So in the active participation, involving, that's a very specific, I like that one, a very specific way of engaging students, sort of engaging them in education development. While you're still entering stuff. We realized only fairly recently, actually, at Atlab that we didn't do that intentionally. So about, I guess, a year and a half ago, we started a student advisory board, and we frequently contact them and consult them or involve them in things that we're doing. Yeah, someone has discovered the like option. What is life online without the ability to like something? Well, you can also like what other people say. So, yeah, feeling involved and willing to contribute. And a genuine interest. And forgetting that you're in an educational program and challenging yourself. I think these are all really sort of very sort of great examples, actually, of what it means for students to be engaged or how it manifests itself, and also a few examples of what you could do together. So I think we already have a shared idea, or our ideas complement each other on what student engagement could be about. So there are many definitions of the concept, and I think one should never be too overly academic, but it helps to have a definition and to have some kind of sort of pivot or sort of an orientation point. This comes from a somewhat older literature review in student engagement, but I can definitely recommend it. These are the great days of the Higher Education Academy. They are unfortunately behind us a little bit, but Trowler wrote a literature review and came up with this sort of combined definition of student engagement, which says a lot, and therefore it doesn't say too much yet. What I think, though, is a critical sentence in this one is that it is not just about the time, effort, and other relevant sources that students invest in their studies, but that it is a mutual affair. So it is both what students do and institutions do in sort of intentionally thinking about how time, effort, and other resources are invested in what students do. And I really like this very much, also originally from the retention perspective, sort of in the Netherlands. I don't know what it's like in Belgium, but when students drop out in the first year, very often the explanation is sort of either was too difficult, or even more frequently, this was apparently not what they should be studying. So we focus a lot on what we call matching, which I think excuses institutions the wrong way, because it means that it would never have anything to do with how they teach the stuff they're teaching. So the mutuality, I think, is really important in this. What helped me, because it's still a broad concept, very much is to see that in the literature, there is also a common distinction of 3 dimensions within student engagement. And this is, I think, where, for me, it got really interesting. I mean, this triad is very common. You see it in a lot of behavioral sort of research, but it's also very helpful. Saying that student engagement has an affective component, which is really about how students feel about what they do. And whenever this seems elusive, just replace student with employee or yourself, and then it immediately makes sense if it doesn't already. But this is about feeling connected, not being nervous about things. Think of exam, think of success and expectation. To feel acknowledged, the common thing, like students don't want to be just a number. Who does, after all? To be safe enough, to really feel secure enough to open your mind and engage in your learning. The affective element in engagement is a really important one, and I think not one that we have been paying a lot of attention to. It's growing now, but sort of. Then the behavioral part, sort of being engaged, the behavioral dimension of it is really knowing what it is that you can do, or what you should do, and also wanting to do it. Then you show this engagement, being willing to collaborate, to do all those things here. And then the one that maybe we have been focusing a lot on in sort of finding explanations for things like dropout and stuff, sort of the cognitive one, clearly is important. We need to be interested. Some of you said, to have this sense that what you're doing is not something you're doing because the program tells you to, but because you really want to know, or because you really want to develop something that you're going to use later. So, and obviously, these three forms of engagement really interact with each other, these three dimensions. If you don't feel safe and secure, it's much harder to say, oh, this is so interesting, or let me try and do this. If you have no clue what it is that is expected of you, or whether it will be appreciated that you actually do something, that will hold you back, and therefore also hold you back on your interests. The interesting thing, and a little bit as an aside, but I wanted to bring it in here, is that this somehow resembles a lot of motivation theory. It's not exactly the same, it doesn't really overlap with it, so even though I gave types of motivation the same color as dimensions of engagement, that is not to say that it is a one-on-one. But if I put it in here also because I'm thinking, if thinking in terms of engagement is too abstract for you or too touchy-feely maybe, which it might be for some staff, some teaching staff, think of it in terms of motivation. And if you're familiar a little bit sort of, and I have to be careful here because I'm not a specialist in motivation theory, but when you think of Ryan and DC, when you think of the academic motivation scale by Wijngaard and others, and just motivation theory in general, then you know that even within intrinsic motivation, which we always value so much, there are different types of being motivated, from the idea of I want to accomplish something and be able at some point to say, look, I did this, I have finished something. Some others, I mean, sometimes you see more than one type of motivation in one person, but sometimes it's a bit linked also to who you are, but are motivated by the experience of doing it. I don't really care where this takes us or me, I just love doing it. And others have this idea of, at the end of this, I really want to know something, or want to know for myself, which is different from accomplishment because that's then finished, but that I would be able to understand and do this also in the future. So whether you look at it from the perspective of engagement and affective, behavioral, and cognitive, or different types of motivation, there is a lot of material in here that you could use to take a critical look at what you do when you organize your education at whatever level. And that is, I think, the value of a framework like this. So what I have done in Maastricht, in talking to people in this whole cycle when I started, is really turn those descriptions of different dimensions of engagement into questions. And really have sort of colleagues think about, okay, if you look at it from the perspective of the affective dimension of engagement, ask yourself the question, what is it that helps students feel at home? To really get to know each other, to feel it's not on this list, but trust, for instance, and to feel a member of the community. Or even to say, this particular thing that we do and that we focus on now, does it instill a sense of belonging? Does it instill or contribute to feeling more at home? So you can ask all these questions about, sort of based on the descriptions of the dimensions of engagement. And here I'm thinking, and I only feel justified in saying this because I have been teaching sort of for quite some time myself as well, and know that I'm guilty of not systematically or not even casually maybe thinking about all these different dimensions when I was thinking about how do I teach and how do I structure my course. I think the one that I thought about the most sort of was probably, I find this interesting, why would students find this interesting? So thinking about their potential cognitive engagement, and maybe also because of the problem-based learning setting in Maastricht, the behavioral. So what can I build into my course that really makes students want to collaborate a lot? But looking back at it now, and particularly in the current situation that we're in, I'm thinking I could have done more of that. So when you have, what I like about this personally is that the framework itself of the three dimensions is not rocket science. It's common sense. It gains value from the fact that a lot of research has been done about it as well. But when you say it, And when you sort of look at it together, discuss it, it makes sense that engagement consists of elements like these, and that they may reinforce or interfere with each other. But you can create something out of it that really works, that you could use as a critical self-evaluation tool. And by the way, here I think it is so important to not immediately jump to hearing the student voice, because that might almost be a way of avoiding taking the responsibility of going through the exercise yourself. Of course, you want to hear what students feel about this, but I think it's also very important that you ask these questions about something you do yourself, sort of putting yourself in the shoe of students. You've been a student, you are a human being, so there might be quite a bit that you have in common with them, or where you should try to see what you have in common with them. So just sort of as a sort of one way of operationalizing this would be to create a little simple table where in the top row you put elements of what it is that you do. In this example, I use this with people who organize the introduction days at a faculty, but it can also be elements of your course. You just say, break it down into stuff that we do. The welcome by the dean, sort of the information fair or market that you may have in the building, the cozy lunch, this activity designed by sort of dedicated teaching staff about, it's 12 o'clock on Monday, the first Monday of December, sort of the alarm still works, folks, or it's a nuclear war. And there may be social events, there may be more like this. And then create 3 more rows for each of the dimensions and start thinking about, okay, how does this affect students? For instance, there might be this dean, and I was welcomed ages ago with this sentence, and I'm afraid it still happens, where a dean or program director says, look to your right, look to your left, because that person quite likely will not be at graduation with you. Which was always meant to instill this feeling that this was a very demanding and tough program, and maybe instill you with a sense of pride. But my own analysis is, in terms of effective engagement, it may do 2 things. It might either give you a sense of huge insecurity. Okay, so this is a red race, what's going to happen? Am I up to that? Or a sense of superiority. Okay, so which I guess was the idea, sort of, that's not going to happen to me, I'm so much better than the others. Which in terms of my behavioral engagements, put an emphasis on the notion of competition. Because in order for me not to be one of them, to my left or right, I have to be better. So in terms of the cognitive engagement, I mean, these were just my interpretations, so this you can play with this, but I'm thinking an important issue here in terms of cognition becomes what's on the exam and how am I going to pass? Interestingly, on that same day, it might be that indeed a few sort of members of the faculty will set up something really exciting, a little experiment or an engaging debate, and they love it, they sacrifice a Saturday for it, they do it. And that may instill in students who are there thinking, yes, oh, we're part of it. Look, they really care about this. They came up with something that they thought we found interesting. So I'm excited. I feel part of it already. And I cannot wait to begin and look at how they talk about the subject matter. This is why I came to study here. So that might be a good thing. But as all of this is happening at the same day, the least thing it will do is create some cognitive dissonance. So now what is this place about? Is it a competition? Is it a rat race? Or is it valued if I sort of collaborate with others and become part of a team and am excited about the subject matter? So this is, it's a simple sort of tool that everyone can make, sort of who can sort of draw a table on a piece of paper or in Excel or in Word or whatever you want to use, based on these descriptors and descriptions of the dimensions of engagement that you can come up with yourself. Because sort of what I filled out here, from insecurity to this is why I came here, were answers to the questions: does it make me feel included? Does it make me feel safe? Does it trigger my interest? Do I see a purpose? Putting myself in the position of students. Are there any questions so far? And the terrible other, I see four ads and 3 names, but sort
You
of.
can put your questions in the chat. Or
and let me maybe ask this other sort of terrible sort of teacher question, but does it make sense so far? This is where you either sort of say, no, not at all, or you say, or you not, but sort of not doing anything has a negative effect on my effective engagement with you guys. It makes me nervous. So does it make sense?
Yes, in my opinion, it makes sense, Oscar.
Thank you, Wilfred.
So I also recognize a lot of what you're saying in the examples that you're giving. So it's a nice instrument to analyze what you're doing on student engagement currently and what you could do to improve. Yes, so very helpful. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, if there are more questions or comments, I think I'm going a bit faster than I thought I would be, so there will definitely be time to discuss this more. But there is a few more steps, and here I'm taking this really into the current context a little bit.
Yeah.
I think we were just talking in the breakout sessions earlier this morning about sort of what this all does to us, and there I also said what I've sort of bothered other people with as well, is that I think this has been such, I mean, it's been a demanding sort of 9 months, and it's still going on, but it's also highly fascinating. If you look at this from sort of almost, I would say, an analytical academic perspective, or less pretentiously, just sort of trying to understand what's going on, it has exposed many things about society, and it has also exposed many things about teaching, I think. And a phrase that sort of occurred to me sort of when I was thinking about this earlier is that what it has exposed is what you could call the mediating role of the complexity. And by which I mean the fact that sort of we've been talking in higher education land about student journeys more recently, and about the holistic student experience. And I think we're not really grasping what that really means. And again, it's the common sense, simple observation that students are not sort of singular units that sit in a course or that are in an administrative process, but whenever they are one of those things, they're themselves in all of that complexity, and they operate within an environment that's hugely complex. So in a normal situation, and this is sort of the picture in the background is a square in the middle of Maastricht, well, yeah, basically in the center where one of the central buildings of the university is, which has a cafeteria in it and the student services and stuff. The Faculty of Business and Economics, the law faculty, the arts and social sciences faculties, they're all just a few steps away, as is the university college. I thought it was symbolic for everything that's there in a normal situation. And that is so hard to grasp, sort of, and in its impact, the physical spaces, the friends that people have to hang out with, sort of, and run into, sort of, the co-curricular activities that students do. It's not really part of my studies, but it is, because if I wouldn't be a student, I would never do this, like being a member of a student association, or some types of volunteer work. The extracurricular activities that spill over into that, like internships or activities within your study program, or sometimes also extracurricular activities that are sort of to do with learning, although you don't get credit for it, all these different things. The role models that provides. Sort of first-year students, I think everyone's very much concerned about first-year students in particular right now, who do not walk into a building, who do not see simple things that we're not even aware of might be an issue for them. Sort of an example, which is a real life example that someone sort of shared with me a couple of weeks ago, is a question that she got from a first-year student via the mail, which was, if we want to print something, do we need to bring our own paper? Now, this sounds like a silly question, but if you grow up, you know, you went to high school, how often do you really need to print something in high school, even today? Sort of, and you do it at home, probably. sort of with the family printer. And now you wrote this paper, and even though a lot of stuff is happening online, there's still the requirement you submit something apparently sort of in hard copy, but you're never sort of amongst the senior students who you see walk to the printer, hold this card on it, sort of punch in a code, and out comes the paper they wrote. You have just no idea. And that's a simple thing. So role models in terms of, that's the sort of the ideal I aspire to as an academic, but also, oh, these are the more experienced students that navigate through the program, knowing the ins and outs of it. None of that is there. It is also very important, I think, to realize that this applies to our education as well. Even when we think a lot about how we design our teaching and the student learning, I think this situation may have made us very much aware of how modest and humble we should be. If students do well on a course, that may definitely be in part because of what we're doing, how we've organized things, how we sort of set up sort of that learning opportunity for them. But it also has a lot to do with that mediating effect of everything that students can do in the margins of your course, but in the center of their life. For instance, when they leave the classroom and can ask each other, what the hell was he talking about? What are we expected to do now? Ah, that's what we're, oh. Or to sort of, to go back and talk to you in sort of during the coffee break and say, could you explain this once more? And then you do it and you don't even realize that apparently in the formal parts of your course, you didn't explain it well. And there's a lot of that going on. Students organizing themselves without having to even think about it, because they leave your course and they have a cup of coffee together and they chat about it. Also in a good way, sort of something, a little seed that you planted may sort of grow because of how they talk about it, but that as well was not something that you orchestrated. So that role of the complexity of the student, the holistic student experience, I think we have just taken for granted. And the sad thing is that nowadays, sort of a lot of that is gone. Basically, sort of a lot of the dark blue spaces sort of are not available or not as available anymore to students. So, and I highlighted here courses and assessment. Assessment could also be part of courses, but assessment, I fear, still sort of determines sort of academic or sort of student life to a large extent. These are the places where a lot of that needs to happen now, or where we need to think about how we can make students do those things, not assuming that they will come up with that themselves. And I think we've all seen examples of this. Sort of a lot of the context disappears. And when you talk to students, one of the things I still do for the college is that I'm an academic advisor. In the open curriculum of the college, students take their, sort of decide on their program every semester, and they talk to a member of staff about that. And so you build up some kind of sort of relationship with a group of students, you know what they're doing. It was shocking to see how sort of damaged their engagement and motivation was, being thrown back sort of really at this being the main channel of communication, particularly in an international, yeah. Wilfred, you want to ask a question? Go ahead.
And you suddenly stopped in a sentence. I know. What I was asking is, what do you do as a university to compensate, for example, the lack of role models? So how are you trying to stimulate this affective dimension?
Yep.
For example,
I think the
how
role
do you
model
do it online?
Yeah, so let me, I'm not sure that it answers, because the role models is a really difficult one indeed, because there is so much sort of that's happening implicitly there by just observing. But let me go to the next one, because this is sort of the quadrants on the left is a little bit the reality we're in now, I think. So this is an overview, one way of organizing sort of the various options and activities in a blended learning environment. And by blended, I definitely also include sort of the offline possibilities. So that's why I didn't put any tools or anything in this in these quadrants, but rather sort of a common distinction when you think in blended learning and online learning between, on the one hand, synchronous activities and asynchronous activities, and on the other, sort of group activities and individual activities. Because we know that sort of in the online learning environment, a lot of asynchronous activities can be organized really well, sort of just by creating a platform where students can come and go, get information, leave information behind, work on a paper together while not having to be there all at the same time. Think even of something simple like a Google Doc. So different combinations of these two axes lead to different types of activities. So, and I think when it comes to this way, this sense of being engaged, these in particular are really important. So, because in creating a shared sense of context and purpose, and also how are we doing on this, we're answering to a lot of these engaging factors like, hey, I'm part of something. We're working towards accomplishment together. We also have a clear purpose together, which I think has become a lot more important now, or it's more obvious now how important that is than maybe before this situation arose. We, I guess, often assumed the purpose that students have for this course is to pass it. That's it. They need to do this, they need to have credit, they need to move on. And they may have an individual interest, but we, I think, haven't thought very often about, but as a group, do they maybe have a common purpose in how they are sort of in this particular module, in this course, or in this project? So it's not an immediate answer to your question, Wilfred, but I think creating opportunities for students to discuss this, building them into the course, even if it needs to happen online, is essential. Allowing students to have an exchange, even, I mean, we did it really briefly by you entering your perspectives of engagement. That could have been the starting point on, okay, so we have a shared purpose, even for this little session here, which is to discover more about how student engagement can be a concept that works as a tool when we design education. We could sort of, if this would be an ongoing project, we could review together, are we making progress on this? And what do we do, and what can each of us do to contribute to this? How do we bring this all together in a synthesis? These are all elements that I think are sort of not given that much attention in many education modules. In projects, in things that we call projects, they usually do. Which is why fairly often I think students really appreciate sort of project-based learning, because now it's about us. Now we see why we're doing this, and we were really working together. I realize that it may be sort of, may require more of us to bring this into what you might call regular courses. And sort of immediately someone will step up and say, yeah, but I do this intro course, and it's just about them getting to know sort of the basics of this field so that they can move on. To that you can say two things, I would think. One of them, so there is a clear purpose. Now, create opportunities for students to make it their purpose. Second, just as the three dimensions of engagement may sometimes be more prominent in one activity than in another, they do not all have to be given the same sort of value and attention in everything that you do. But you will need to look at it at a program level. If at program level, you provide a sense of direction and purpose and context for students, it might very well be that for a required course where it is more about, okay, we're absorbing this because we need it, students will understand that and give it a proper place. Because in other parts of the program, they see how they actually work with that. I think the same goes for us. We like the moments that we're creating new ideas, but we also know that sometimes we need to read this book in order to do that, or this article. and we don't mind, even if it's not sort of triggering all our engagement as much. So I think in how you operate, and that goes more to your question, Wilfred, but here I'm improvising, to be honest, but with your role model question, is to engage with your students in such a way that you can be that role model and that students can be that role model for each other. Maybe not for how to operate the printer, but for how to take the lead sometimes on a little part within the course, or to show your passion by allowing students to talk about what something means for them and responding to that, if that makes sense. So that you, I think sort of the dialogue on why is it that we're here together is a much more critical one than are we using the right tools in a blended learning environment. Once we have a sense of purpose, I think many tools will work to support that. But if we don't know why we're doing what we're doing, even the funniest little gadget is not going to get us very excited. So if we would have been with a larger group, we would have done the breakout thing, but I don't think there is a need for a breakout thing. But to take all of this back, what we could do with sort of 10 minutes left is to talk a little bit, and we could use, I created a WooClap option for it, but maybe that's not even necessary. We could talk about, I would think, particularly recent ideas that you've developed, initiatives that you've taken that you felt sort of were needed in the current constellation, and review them a little bit from the perspective of student engagement. So what I have put on the screen here now is sort of a list of those questions that I was talking about, where wherever it says it, you can insert that thing you do, or elements of that thing you do. So it, in my example, was the welcome address by the dean and the activity organized by the sort of enthusiastic teachers. But it could also be something that you have been doing. So I'm curious to hear if you have done something or are thinking of doing something that you feel this in this current situation might be sort of helpful and conducive to student engagement, and would sort of be courageous enough to present it here and then sort of talk about it. Yeah, Paul.
Yes, I was waiting for this moment to listen to everybody, actually. For me, we do it a lot because, and I give one example how we do it with lessons. For lessons, when I prepare lessons, it's not necessarily the way my lesson will be. So I follow the pace of the students and also where they're interested in. So when my lesson starts, I don't know where it will end. So I have a lot of things gathered around in different ways. And actually I feel the pace of the students. Sometimes they are more in front. If I give the example here, I was waiting for this because the first 40 minutes was interesting, but I was a bit waiting for collaborate and share things, how people do it. And in my last lesson, I think 50 minutes was what I prepared, and all the other 2 hours went in different directions planned. And it's because my students are a lot on the company. They are on the workspace, and they bring that information to the classroom. And I used to start with what they bring from there, and then I try to get it in a bigger picture and let's come it together. So we work with draw boards or stuff like that. And then with that draw board, with students to make the draw board together, and then I go pick in and maybe next lesson go further on where we landed that lesson.
So I'm curious then to hear, because your example, I gave a sort of a presentation the other day on something related to this, and I used a project that we did at the college. But that was also very practice oriented. So external clients, it's called Think Tank, and students have to come up with an answer to a problem presented to them. with those examples, someone else might say, okay, I can see how that works in that particular applied context, but now what for courses that seem to be much more sort of, let's say, traditional in the subject matter. So I'm curious if anyone has, even if it's just a part of what Paul sort of just is talking about and some of the things I was talking about, has anyone tried anything like that or is considering anything like that in what you might call a regular course? Or do you see possibilities on sort of, and Paul, you're right, by the way. I apologize for talking for 40 minutes.
No problem.
No. But you know, sometimes you start sort of the collaboration stuff right away. And here I just thought, I want to talk, but I want to talk all the time, by the way.
That's the big problem with teachers. I also
yes, exactly. But for instance, this sort of what I ended up sort of talking about last, and I think it also, Paul, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it relates, I think, to what you're doing, because by letting the students synthesize what they have been doing, I think they also get a clearer idea of what it is they're trying to accomplish.
Yes, that's true. And also with more theoretical lessons, like you say, classical, also there we try to interact with the people. So when I start with the classical lesson, I divided the group in parts, and they gather information about my lesson, and then they bring it. And after that, I come back with what I prepared. And then I hope the things they said I can put in the bigger picture. So also with the normal lessons, I try to interact and do short breaks. So they have to also make my lesson. And sometimes it's one-on-one, and sometimes we see new things they are finding, or so also in the classical lessons we try to engage them to make the lesson.
So that, so one question that others may also have, I'm not sure, again, I don't want to speak for it. Does anyone have a question or want to respond? I was thinking of the elephant in the room when you talk about these things, which is called assessment, because many people will say, okay, yeah, that's fine, but then it might be that that either they don't get from the course that they're supposed to, but then how do you assess it if you can never predict what they're going to talk about?
For us, assessment is we look at the growth of the students, and the theoretical or the classical lessons, for us it's a backpack, and we assess it on moments how they use the backpack. So for me, theoretical lessons are, we fill the backpack with stuff like that, and after a while, for the assessment, they have to use that backpack. And if they don't use it, then we say, oh, look at your backpack. We already talked about that. That's the way how we want to evaluate the students.
Okay.
I think that simple table with the 3 dimensions, it's also really interesting to apply that to your chosen form of assessment.
Yes, indeed. What you were talking about was really interesting, and it was not new or something, but it was a structure that we use and we can use for all those systems. And it's just the hardest thing is to find what works, what doesn't work. Sometimes I also end my lesson with the Google Forms that they can say, okay, what was nice? What do you want to see next? What do you want to see more? And we try to use that in next lessons. Or
yes, who said at the beginning? Someone said sort of involving students in education development. Who said
that?
I said that.
Okay, so could you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it was a specific thought because for a program we're developing, AI education, we involve a lot of staff, but not so much students. And then there was this student who came with similar initiative themselves, and said they really want to be involved in the process. So that's why I was thinking about it. Yeah.
Has anyone been doing that? sort of in this group that sort of, and then indeed sort of, it's interesting to see, and we haven't, I immediately sort of admit, but sort of, because there's a difference between consulting students every now and then and actually make them sort of co-creators of a course.
I just very shortly, because I am not a lecturer or a teacher. I'm a project manager supporting the teaching academy, but I did hear that the lecturers at university are mentioning this as actually also an engagement, a student engagement way. So that's the purpose. So yeah, that's why I'm not contributing, because I am also getting the input from others. But I did hear about that at the University of Groningen, and we have a couple of examples for that.
Okay. Yeah, there's very little. I mean, Tanya, you wanted to say something too.
Yes,
we're almost going to be kicked out, I guess. But
two of my colleagues, instructional designers, are currently running a small innovation project where they've invited, I think, 5 or 7 students to create their own course, and you know, the student as teacher. So the project will involve training them how to do that, how do you create a course, etc., and then create their own learning experience. So we're very curious how that will end up, if it's successful or not. But it's very interesting to watch the interest from students in that.
And what would be the indicators of success?
The indicators of success would be the students successfully completing a course that they teach themselves or to each other. So a co-created course.
Yeah, I mean, we're only scratching the surface here, because indeed there's so much involved, sort of programmatic design, course design, assessment. And again, I think we have to wrap it up. So, and Paul, you said it really well. There was nothing new about what I said. I hope that the sort of the little trick with the table, that structure, that will be helpful for you when you review things. And if you want to contact me sort of about this, also if you come up with stuff that's interesting for us to hear, I think it's nice that we're doing this now.
Yeah.
It will be sort of even nicer if we continue to have these exchanges, I think. So please contact me if you have any questions or comments. Or
thank you very much, Oscar, for this. Yeah, can you hear me for this talk? Yeah, I think there's a lot to think about, especially application of this model in fully online learning environment and face-to-face, and of course the hybrid. Yeah. We will return to the main room, and the link is here. Just click on the link. We'll go back to the main room, and Marcus will address us, and then we'll go for lunch. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Have a nice day for the,